Hi there, you don't need me to tell you it's been a rather soggy October so far. In fact, when we look at how many days of rain we've had this month compared to how many days that have been dry, well, this is the number of dry days for the first 14 days of October using radar estimates. And you can see much of the country here in the blues and purples indicating 1-2 days at best of dry conditions. Even pockets of white showing up here across North Wales and northwest of the Midlands, indicating no dry days at all. Now, by dry days, we of course mean any rain at any stage during the 24 hours that make up the calendar day. So it may well have rained at 10 past midnight, for example, then been dry for the rest of the day. So perhaps a somewhat pessimistic look at things so far this month, but it does show how unsettled, how wet it has been. But you'll notice parts of the northeast England, southeast Scotland, up into Aberdeenshire, for example, and up towards Orkney. Here we've had a week or so collectively of dry days, so plenty of usable weather here for outdoor activities, but elsewhere across the UK, dry days have been quite hard to come by over the last couple of weeks or so. We are mid-month more or less, and so this is how rainfall looks so far, again using radar estimates compared to the long-term average. That's the 1981 to 2010 30-year average we're looking at here. Now, at this stage in the month, because we're halfway through, you would expect rainfall amounts for October to be roughly 50% of the monthly average. And so you'd expect most areas to be somewhere in the browns. You can see the key here. Anywhere that is in the light shading of brown or higher has had above average rainfall for this part of the month. And you can see quite clearly many areas are in the light brown or indeed white, or indeed into the blues and purples as well. And the ones that stand out at the moment, northeast England and also parts of Norfolk and Suffolk, where we've had well above average in some places for the first half of the month. If it were to be dry from now on, it would be slightly above average, but of course we have got further rain expected over the next few days or so. So it's quite likely many of us will end up having an above average month for rainfall. We'll have to see how things play out over the coming couple of weeks or so. And why? Well, it's always because of the jet stream. It's been quite active over the last few weeks, since late September really, driving areas of low pressure across the Atlantic. And you can see really as I run this loop through the rest of this week, there's no real let up in sight from a fairly active jet stream. It's always going to be close to the UK. And notice by the weekend, more of a trough developing and more of a ridge out west. It's what we call an amplified pattern, and that means things start to slow down a touch. So instead of frequent areas of low pressure, bands of rain coming in, we're going to start to slow things down somewhat so you get stuck in the same pattern. So showers for quite a few days, and then perhaps more in the way of ridging developing early next week. More on that in just a moment or so. But for the detailed day by day for the next week or so, here's our front on Wednesday. The next front coming in off the Atlantic will have pushed some rain in overnight Tuesday, and this is the starting position then on Wednesday morning. It's a cold front, so it will start to push its way eastwards through the day on Wednesday. Slight complications, a little wave perhaps developing close to the southeast could slow down its clearance here for a time. But broadly speaking, for the rest of this week, it's a big area of low pressure out west, driving areas of rain and showers in. Now, it's mainly showers we're dealing with for the rest of this week, and they're always going to be most focused to the south and the west because we've got these southwesterly winds pushing those showers in. So the further north and east you are, fewer showers, more in the way of drier weather expected. Over the weekend, though, that low pressure gradually pushes its way very slowly eastwards. So the focus for showers will probably shift somewhat by the weekend, more widely perhaps for a time on Saturday, and then towards the end of the weekend, perhaps it's eastern parts of the UK that may see the bulk of the showers as western areas start to dry out. Notice more of a northerly flow though developing on the back side of this area of low pressure before this high pressure starts to build in a bit more as we head further on into the following week. So quite a bit going on. This is just 4 computer models that we look at in the office. We look at many others, of course, but it just gives a flavour for the rainfall distribution. Now, don't concentrate on the numbers too much because these are just models, they're just tools. They're never going to get it right, and rainfall can vary considerably from one location to the next. That is the nature of showers, but it does flag out quite well how inland eastern parts of the UK will see some rain, but nowhere near as much as these exposed western and southern coasts, where there could be quite a bit of rain, maybe 3 or even 4 inches in some places, just because showers are likely to be very frequent in this part of the world over the next few days, and so the totals will continue to add up. Some hail, some thunder, gusty winds in some of these showers too, and occasionally they'll push further inland on those southwesterly winds at times. But generally speaking, you can see there should be some reasonable dry weather in between. And just because the setup is showery doesn't mean it will necessarily rain every day, everywhere. Some places will still get some dry days in there, but overall it is an unsettled looking pattern. Now, as we go on into next week, remember I talked about that area of high pressure, that more amplified jet stream. It's likely early part of next week, this ridge will start to extend more up from the south. Now remember, we've got a northerly ahead of that, so it's bringing in cooler air to end the weekend, and so with high pressure building into that colder air, it means the nights will get a little bit colder, and it's possible we may have a little bit of frost around, some slow fog patches to clear early part of next week as well, but potentially 1 or even 2 dry days for many of us in here, although still the chance of the odd shower running down the North Sea, for example, and also the threat of some rain trying to push in to the northwest of the UK. Notice the isobars too, quite breezy or even windy conditions here as well. Then towards middle of next week, it's likely that high will weaken and shift south, allowing those weather fronts to topple in. But as they are coming in, they are well away from the parent low, which is well over here towards Greenland. So the fronts are weakening, they're moving into high pressure. They're going to be a much weaker feature by the time they get to the south of the UK. And it looks like high pressure may also try to build in from the northwest behind them as well. So although the high pressure is here for a couple of days, and yes, we may see a bit of rain middle of the week, pushing its way southwards, overall next week is unlikely to be as wet as it has been recently, because there's not quite so much activity to these fronts, and so the drier spells will tend to be somewhat longer. So if you're trying to do some drilling, for example, it looks a little bit more promising through next week than it has done for the last 2 weeks or so. Now there's still quite a bit of detail to iron out between now and then, so if you need that specific detail for your part of the world, by all means give our forecasters a call. We're available 6 in the morning through till 6 in the evening every single day of the week, including weekends, and we're constantly looking at all of this data, and we can give you that all important advice that you may need in order to make those decisions over the coming few weeks or so. So looking at that further ahead over the next sort of 10 to 15 days, we use ensemble forecasting, which is where we run the same computer model multiple times just to see how good the agreement is on various weather trends over the next couple of weeks or so. Here you can see the mean sea level pressure. I picked Cambridge as an example here, just to give you a flavour that you can see this ridge building in early part of next week, Monday into Tuesday, which may give 1 or 2 dry days for a time during the early part of next week, as I say. But then the pressure starts to come back down again. Remember the red line here, that's the average of all of these grey lines. So you can see there is a trend for the pressure to start to come back down later on next week, just hinting at those fronts trying to slide their way southeastwards across the UK. But still notice the difference between where we are now with the mean sea level pressure and where we are middle of next week. It's still higher than where we are now. So overall, it's still looking somewhat dry next week, just not completely dry. There will be a little bit of rain around at times, but probably not a great deal. Very noisy towards the end of this sequence here. There are some potentially quite deep lows showing up next weekend. Equally, some of them going for quite high pressure building in, so quite a big spread towards the end of the month. But overall, the trends are still there for the next 10 days or so. In terms of temperature, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. This is looking at the what we call the 850 millibar temperature. It's about a mile above the ground, and it gives an indication to the type of air mass over the UK, because it's not impacted necessarily by the day-to-day variation of the sun rising and going below the horizon, such as surface temperature is. But you can see the same trends here. So this cooler weather developing through the second half of this week. This dashed line, incidentally, is the average for the time of the year. So temperature slightly below average perhaps to end this week, with the showery, unsettled weather around, but it's windy, so the nights aren't so cold. And then towards the middle of next week, as that front starts to come in off the Atlantic, notice the temperatures, the air mass profile starts to climb just a little bit, so slightly perhaps above average just for a time during the middle part of next week. We could see temperatures in the south getting into the high teens, for example. Then there is a marked trend towards cooler conditions developing as that northerly re-establishes towards next weekend. And really the ensembles, although very noisy, overall indicate below average or near average temperatures, but more likely slightly below, right the way through the end of October into early November. Now it's difficult to get much detail out of this, but there is a trend towards something a little bit colder late October into perhaps early November, just a hint at this early stage. On a bigger picture across Europe for week 2, so this is the 21st to the 27th of October, you can see below average rainfall showing up over the UK. This is next week, with that ridge generally holding firm with weak fronts coming in. So it's not completely dry, but it's nowhere near as wet as it has been recently. Plenty of showers and thunderstorms through the Mediterranean. These could be quite active at times as well at this time of the year, given the warm seas, and well above average temperatures across a good chunk of Eastern Europe into Western Russia, whereas Western Europe starting to cool down somewhat. Now, as we go further ahead into week 3, this is the mean sea level pressure anomaly. Where you see red here, that's where pressure is higher than normal for the time of the year. And that's where we're likely to see the area of high pressure becoming established later next week. So you can see with that, we'd have more of a northwesterly or a northerly flow introducing cooler air, generally speaking, extending more of a drier influence across the UK. Again, not completely dry, but you can see here near or below average rainfall signalled across the UK and indeed much of northwest Europe as well. Still plenty of showery activity and thunderstorms running through the Mediterranean, which is fairly typical for this time of the year. And the very warm conditions starting to retreat somewhat across Eastern Europe, temperatures near or even a smidge below average across Western Europe during this time frame as well. Then towards early November, we're starting to see higher pressure becoming a little bit more established across Scandinavia, notice. Eventually, we might start to see low pressure coming back in again off the Atlantic towards the middle of November. But the overall theme is Scandi high developing for a time, we think late October, early November, which might introduce more of a colder east or northeasterly flow. Now, it's still early on in the season, so we're not expecting anything majorly cold at this stage, but signals are for near or, again, below average rainfall into the early part of November. And temperature-wise, no massively strong signal at the moment. It's still 4 weeks away, but temperatures near or a smidge below average showing up, just hinting at something perhaps a little bit colder developing as we go through the latter part of October into early November, but also some dryish weather around as well. So to summarise, it's pretty unsettled. It's fairly breezy for the rest of this week, really, with showers. That's the main story, but the occasional longer spell of rain. Then we get that transient dry spell early next week with that ridge giving 1, maybe 2 dry days, but with that, the threat of a little bit of frost, nothing too severe, and some patchy fog, which could be somewhat slow to clear. Then it's likely to turn a bit wetter, particularly in the northwest. That's where the rain will be most prevalent the middle part of next week through to the weekend, but occasionally that rain will get further southeast, and then maybe late October, early November, the potential there for a colder spell to develop, but exactly how long and how significant that will be yet to be decided. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. You can always email us or indeed use the hashtag WQFarmingForecast on Twitter. Once again, thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with another Weatherquest Farming Forecast.